You set foot on foreign soil. Only this land isn't ruled by any country or government. In this land we celebrate music. In this land we celebrate games. In this land we celebrate those who compose video game music. Welcome to the VG Embassy. Welcome and thanks for tuning in to another episode of the VG Embassy. This is a show centered around video game music and the amazing online community of fans and podcasters that enjoy it. My name's Ed, and on each episode I'll take the role of Prime VGM Minister and invite a guest VG Ambassador onto the show to share with us their own video game music culture. Or I may share a part of my culture on a solo show. Today, we are talking about... Actually, we don't do very many composer foci on the VG Embassy, but we have a really, really cool one on today's episode. And I am here with my good pal, Cameron Werme. How are you, sir? Welcome back to the show again.
I'm doing as well as I can be, as everyone is right now.
Kind of hunkered down at home?
Yeah, working full-time still, so I don't feel perhaps quite as isolated as most people, but I'd rather not be working, but I'm glad I am, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, well, at least it's paying the bills.
It is. It definitely is.
I'm actually back at work full-time too now, so we are both out of the house, and this is actually the first time we've ever recorded remotely, because we've done, I don't even know how many shows we've appeared on together, but it's always been in the same room, so it's a little strange seeing on a video screen.
Yeah, it is weird. This is the first time I've ever done anything like this remotely before, so first podcast I've recorded remotely. Hopefully I don't screw it up.
I'll go easy on you. All right. Speaking of going easy on you, I'll ask you a really easy question. Who are we talking about today?
We're talking about a feller named Manfred Linzner, who is probably a name most listeners have heard once or twice, and he has become one of my favorites, I will call post 16-bit, I'll say, composers. You know, since that era, he's one of the ones that stands out to me the most. And I'm hoping after this little showcase that he'll tickle the fancy of more VGM fans out there.
Yeah, I agree. I really like his stuff. He's a demo scener as well as a video game music composer, and he's also a game programmer as well. So a lot of his later games, he actually designed and programmed himself. So he's a multi-talented fella. Yeah. I started learning about him probably back in the Pixel Tunes days, and then when I was doing Impulse Project, we played some demo scene music by him. Mm-hmm. So we're going to play a little bit of his demo scene stuff as well as his game music stuff, and sometimes they intersect, so you'll get to hear a little bit of both. What kind of music can we expect from this show? Like, what about him makes you love him, like as a general sound?
Well, it's strange actually a little bit, because his style is not typically what I consider to be my preferred genre, if that makes any sense.
Same with me and Tim Fallon, so I can totally...
Right. It's a lot of electronic, a lot of, I guess that's what I think of it as, just electronic music of different types. A lot of like synth heavy, even at times kind of dance, which again is not really, I'm more of a rock guy. Like my focus is usually around rock music and chip tune music that is done in a rock style, or more chippy sounding VGM in general. And he has some of that, like his Game Boy Color era in particular. But yeah, he's not typically my kind of music per se, but his ability to construct catchy melodies and his ability to make chord progressions that just give me chills is, it could be any kind of music as long as there's a strong melody, ideally some really good harmony work and nice progression from one part to another. any kind of music can give me those chills, which is what I live for. You know what I mean? That's why I listen to music. And there's a few tracks in particular in our track list today that do that, and I can't wait to get to those.
Awesome. When you suggested this show, I was like really excited about it because he's always been one of those composers that anything I've heard from, I've really enjoyed, but I never really like went out and was like, okay, I'm going to listen to like specifically Linzner's stuff.
Yeah.
And so I knew that he made like, Fast RMX, Fast Neo, some Game Boy Color games, but I didn't know that he had a really large Game Boy Advance library.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know that he was doing like indie games on PC and stuff. So these are all kind of new tracks. You've actually picked all the tracks for the show, which is great because I actually asked you to, because I was like, I want to hear what you love. And so I want to be introduced to all this new stuff and kind of learn about it as we go throughout the show.
Yeah.
So we're going to hear some really good dancey stuff from all walks of life. He's composed on at least 3 or 4 different generations of consoles, mostly in chiptune, which is interesting. Usually you see those composers make the transition from chiptune into, Redbook or streaming audio as things get newer, but he kind of like stayed with sequenced music as long as he possibly could until he was like more or less forced to get into streaming audio when consoles no longer supported that kind of music. So I think that's going to be really cool.
I will say regarding the Game Boy Advance thing I hope listeners to this episode love the Game Boy Advance, because I think half the tracks, I think 5 of them on this.
A good portion of them, yeah.
Something like that.
But we're going to start off with something a little bit different, and it's from a really, really obscure game. I don't even know how you found this one. What do we got first on our list?
First, we have from the game Gianna Worlds, which was initially known as Giant Worlds, but we'll discuss that further afterwards. The song is called Kids with an exclamation point. From the first level. This is the only track he did in this game.
Yeah, came out in 1999.
So let's check it out. Welcome back. That funky jam you just heard was from the game Gianna Worlds. It was a Windows game from 1999, composed by Manfred Linzner, obviously, called Kids.
Kids!
Sky. That was level 1 Sky. And that is a good example of Linzner's songwriting style. What'd you think of it?
I love this one. It's got, sometimes demo scene music has the certain quality to it that doesn't really work with being video game background music, but this really does, and I'm glad that they kind of repurposed this for a video game. I love the horn sections, and then I think it's like a flute section that comes in, but it's just very funky. Yeah. It's very bright and upbeat, and it just feels really happy. Like, I think it just puts you in a good mood. You can't listen to this and be sad at the same time,
Yeah, right. He's got a lot of stuff like that, actually, which there's a lot of good mood music in here. This track is, to me, it has all that like classic Linzner synth sound, but those horn samples are not really like anything I've really heard in his stuff before. It's really got that like not big band, but of like a full horn section kind of sound.
Yeah, big and brassy.
Yeah, brassy. Yeah, and the horns sound great, and then it's still good, but it switches to that flute synth, which definitely sounds more like a synth than an actual like flute. The brass stuff, the horns really do sound like horns. The flute kind of sounds a little not quite right, but I love that melody. I love the flute melody when it comes in. It's got this it's got the perfect amount of funk to it. I don't dance at all, but like this track gets me to want to like move around a bit,
Definitely a foot tapper. For sure.
Yeah.
I did a little research on this, and so originally the game was called Giant Worlds, and it was a freeware fan game for the Gianna sisters, which in turn was a freeware fan game for Super Mario Brothers. So it's like fan game inception going on here. So what happened was the game was good enough that the creator of the Gianna sisters, Armin Gesertz, decided to republish the game as Gianna Worlds, basically making part of the Gianna sisters game series canon.
Yep, universe.
And so it got a little more popularity after that happened. The music itself was, as I kind of just alluded to before, was repurposed demo scene music that had already been written by a few composers. And so he added those mod files, actually this is an XM file, into the game and just coded a tracker player into the game itself so that the mod files would sit in the file system in the folder of the game, and then the game would just call them up. So you'd be, hearing those tunes as they were written as you play the game, which is pretty cool. This one's a 16-channel XM file, so it's basically high-quality samples, double the channels of the Super Nintendo without having to worry about sound effects. So you're getting like a really full sound, and I think that's why a lot of the instruments sound pretty layered, is because they're actually layered. They're probably using 2 or 3 different channels for that brass to sound as full as it does. He says that he originally composed the tune for a demo scene party called The Party, which took place in 1998 for his group Abyss. And Abyss was a actually, I think he still releases demo scene stuff under the Abyss group. We've got a track coming up at the end, which is a demo scene only track, which I wanted to share, which is also released under the Abyss name. So that's kind of been his demo scene group for years and years and years, at least since 1998. He also says in the notes for the file that he created all the samples himself. So he would either sample his own keyboards or take a sample of an actual instrument, digitize it, import it into the tracker, and then use it as. So my guess is that flute sound was probably from a keyboard that he had, and maybe those brass samples were actual, sampled instruments from a CD or a sample library that he had laying around, which is why they sound a lot more realistic.
Yeah, one definitely sounds more realistic than the other. It's a very full sounding track, really high quality, which is strange because it doesn't fit the game. I've never played a Gianna Sisters game. All I really know about it is what I've heard on your show and some others. People talk about the game. I know it's a pretty well-known game, at least within the community, but I'd never seen it. So I don't know if this one looks like the original, but to me, it looks more like a classic PC platformer, like Commander Keen or Jazz Jackrabbit or something like that, but not as good as either of those. But the music is better, It's kind of strange, like watching gameplay footage of the game, and the music is kind of like, is this the same? Sounds like it's from something else, but
Basically because it was from something else.
yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
Yeah, so like I said, it was a kind of a take on Super Mario Brothers, where it's just two sisters instead of two brothers. They run around a world full of mushrooms and bricks and get power-ups, and it's like the original Gianna Sisters was very, very close to Super Mario Brothers. It was basically somebody wanted to make Super Mario Brothers for, I think it was either the Commodore 64 or the Amiga that the first game was released for. And it was basically like, oh, we want to have Super Mario Brothers on this system, but Nintendo's not going to make it, so we're going to make it ourselves, and we're going to slightly change the characters to, avoid any copyright stuff.
Right.
So as more and more Gianna Sisters sequels came out, the gameplay started diverging more and more from the Mario gameplay until it became its own kind of series. And now games have been releasing on the Wii U and the Switch and the 3DS, so it's really its own kind of game series and franchise at this point, which is really cool. It's neat to see kind of a fan game with such kind of humble beginnings get much more successful as time has gone on.
I feel like that's happening more and more nowadays. Indie games are blowing up to become, phenomena, which is great. I think that's really cool how that can happen, how that sort of thing can flourish in today's video game climate.
Yeah, this was a very early indication of what could happen to indie games. Because at this point, I don't think really games that started this small could get this big. And it wasn't until, Steam really started picking up, literal Steam, and the platform started getting so much more attention that people were turning their sights on a lot of these indie games that before this were only released on, the publisher's own websites, and we're lucky to get, a couple of visitors per day or something like that. So,
or Newgrounds or something.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And a lot of those games ended up becoming big as well. So, anyways, let's move on to our next track.
So next up we have another track that's perhaps too good for the game. It's BGM 1 from Jimmy White's Cue Ball, the Game Boy Color from 2000. Let's check it out.
Boys and girls, that was BGM 1 from Jimmy White's Cue Ball that came out on the Game Boy Color in the futuristic year of 2000. I really, really like this one. This actually reminds me of a lot of the music that I played with the Dyad on the Pico 8 episode. It just has that really kind of funky, very arpeggiated feel. It's super Game Boy Color. It's just a really good tune for, I guess, playing some cue ball too. Yeah. Why'd you pick this one?
I have my sort of standard Linzner favorites, but I wanted to dive in a little more and just, explore his other stuff. And this is one of the first ones I found that I hadn't heard. Although from what you've told me, I probably have heard it on another podcast. I just didn't remember. And it just has this kind of slow groove to it that I love. I picture this being, performed by someone with it has this really confident feel to it, like I can imagine just a really confident look in someone's face as they're playing a song like this, where it's just like, yeah, like it just has this great groove to it.
Yeah, it's almost got a little bit of a Tim Fallon quality to it, much more so than Linzner's other music has.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, it stands on its own, that it's just got this steady kind of driving beat and a lot of open space, I think, which Fallon likes to use on his chip music, especially like on the NES and the Game Boy. So I feel like this one is right along the lines with that. Probably why I'm drawn to it so much.
It's like Fallon without the soloing.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, yeah, I'd say a lot like his Pictionary stuff, where it was very, very groove oriented. He didn't do a lot of that kind of wankiness that he does on a lot of the other games that he writes for.
Yeah. It definitely has that like Western Game Boy Color, sound. Sounds a little more like a Fallon tune than maybe some of that other stuff does. You're right. I hadn't really noticed that, but melodically, it definitely has that Fallon feel to it.
Also, being one of his earlier tracks, I mean, we are going chronological in this show, so maybe his dancey stuff didn't come until much later on. Because I mean, Sky it's bright and upbeat, but it's still not as dancey as a lot of his later stuff. So I think maybe he was still kind of developing that sound that we're going to kind of come to know as the Linzner sound by the time we get to the end of the show.
Yeah.
But these are two kind of pieces that don't really fall in line with a lot of his other stuff. And I think we'll start to kind of hear that as we go throughout the show, how it gets a little more into that dance mode that you were talking about at the beginning.
Yeah.
This also feels a bit demo scene-ish to me as well, and also works well as video game music. I mean, with Pool, you can kind of put any kind of music in it because it's not really doesn't have to match so much action. Yeah. Have you played this game?
No, there are only a few games actually of all these that I've actually played, but I have looked at footage, and this, to me, it looks okay. I played a lot of Side Pocket on the Game Boy when I was a kid, and I loved that. From the look of this one, I'd say it doesn't look as streamlined and as engaging as Side Pocket, but it looks cool. The physics look pretty decent. It's got this obnoxious... It's got these really nice sounding vocal samples where this tune kind of plays during the main... It's like the main theme while you're playing, the gameplay theme. And these vocal samples interject constantly, like Lucky Shot and, all this stuff. And for that sample to play, the music cuts out entirely.
Oh, okay.
And it happens like constantly. So it's like you'd be grooving along to this tune and suddenly this commentator just butts in with some comment, which again sounds really good. Like the vocal samples are actually fantastic. But it just, the music shuts off. That's what I'm there for. So
yeah, interesting. Does it start the music over again after the sample, or does it just continue?
No, thankfully. No. That would would be a nightmare, an unplayable nightmare.
You'd hear the same three chords over and over again.
You'd never get to the main, which is my favorite part.
Right.
You would never get there.
All right, so definitely one to listen to the soundtrack more than actually play the game. That makes sense.
Yep.
I've heard the next one we have on our list that was actually kind of fun to play. What do we got coming up?
The next one is from Spider-Man 2. This is Sinister Six from Game Boy Color in 2001. The track is World Trade Center, which is also the stage. Let's take a listen.
All right.
welcome back. That was World Trade Center from Spider-Man 2, The Sinister Six from the Game Boy Color, 2001, composed by Manfred Jarnstel.
Who? I think I showed up on the wrong show.
Well, rather than saying the same name every time. Yeah, so this is a great one. He did the soundtrack to the first game also, which is very good. But this one, it's almost like he decided, like, oh, you know what? I gotta make some catchier tunes because this is a well-known IP and the music should suit that. This game is what you'd expect from a Spider-Man game, pretty much. Web-slinging, platforming stuff. The soundtrack is great. I love this song in particular, although when I picked it, I was torn between 2 or 3 songs. If it wasn't for that, what I guess I would call the chorus in this track, I might have gone with another one. But when it shifts to that, it kind of modulates, and then that main melody comes in. It's just so catchy and infectious, and I love it. And that's what I like a lot about particularly his Game Boy Color type stuff. He has a good sense of melody, and for some reason really likes to, I don't know what it is about the chip or what, but he writes really good melodies. Yeah,
so this is actually a good time to talk about his programming skills, because he actually wrote for the Amiga sound chip, the Paula, was sample-based. It was basically like a 4-channel SNES sound chip. You can load samples into it, play them back in sequence, kind of like a Super Nintendo. He and his pal Dexter decided that they really liked writing Commodore 64 SID chip music. So they wanted to continue writing Commodore 64 music, but on the Paula sound chip. So they coded a way for the Paula to sound like a SID and made their own tracker and basically designed, so they loaded in like sine wave files and found a way to manipulate them so that they could emulate what a Commodore 64 SID chip sounds like, with the ring modulation and all of the features that the SID chip had. So it's called the AHX Tracker, and because they were and still are part of the Abyss group, they called it Abyss's Highest Experience Tracker, AHX. So, yeah, so when you see AHX tunes, it was written with code that was written by Manfred Linzner, and that brings me back full circle as to why I think his Game Boy Color stuff is so good, because it uses very similar technology to what Commodore 64 and his AHX music did, which is basically like a wavetable kind of a tracker stuff. So a lot of this is very Commodore 64 sounding, especially the lead instrument on this has that kind of warping kind of a sound to it.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, that has a very
C64.
For sure. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
That's the part I was talking about too, that melody that comes in that sort of that B part.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they knew exactly how to do that. Sure. With that fully programmable wave channel, they were able to, kind of re-emulate the Commodore 64 sound in there.
Yeah, it's like it sounds like a square with like this warbling.
Yeah, exactly.
That I only really think of when I think of the C64.
And that was part of the ring modulation on the C64. So I don't, the Game Boy Color doesn't natively have that on the sound chip. So I wonder if they even found a way to like code that kind of sound into it, or at least kind of approximate what it would have done. And coding your own tracker like that, you definitely have a good idea on how that sound gets to be made. As far as the music goes, I really like the very heavy percussion. It reminded me a lot of the stuff that Stelladosis wrote for the Game Boy Color, like what was that German game? Das Geheimnis der Happy Hippo Insel or Otto's Autofanten. He wrote some really kind of like heavy, hard-hitting Game Boy Color soundtracks. But it also has that kind of bounce like Alberto Gonzalez's music does. So it seems to like really kind of take influence from a lot of those other Game Boy Color composers at the time. And I wonder if he was kind of listening to those soundtracks, being a European, and also Stelladosis was another German, and so was Linzner. So I wonder if they had the same kind of influences. They both worked in the demo scenes, so maybe they were kind of playing off each other's musicality there. With that very heavy kind of bump, bump, bump snare beat that they both use a lot. So really interesting stuff.
Yeah, I think Linzner has, at least what I've come to recognize as a sort of a very recognizable melodic sense, where, if you had played this one maybe like a couple other similar type tracks from other Game Boy Color games, I'd be able to pick out which one was the Linzner track, because I can hear the melodies in this track in particular, that in like a Game Boy Advance track or something, because he has this. I'm not saying they all sound the same, for sure, and sometimes he definitely does deviate from that. But at times it can be a very recognizable melodic sensibility that he seems to have.
That's cool, and we're going to hear more of that as we go through the show. So, speaking of which, let's move on to our next one. What do we got, sir?
Finally, we get to the meat and or potatoes. This is Dogfight Above the Pacific Ocean from Iridium 3D on the Game Boy Advance, 2001. That tasty morsel you just heard was Dogfight Above the Pacific Ocean from Iridium 3D, 2001 on the Game Boy Advance. I believe this soundtrack is the first of his that I heard, and that might not be true. It was probably the second one actually, but this is the first one I actually listened to intently. I heard one or two tracks, I loved it, put this on, listened to it. This is how I fell in love with his stuff. Talk about a track that's just so well written. Like it starts with that just kind of like casual but kind of pumping rhythm, and you just start feeling it, and then that melody comes in. I just love strong melodies, you know, and if there's nothing else to enjoy about a song, if it's got a strong melody, I can still love it. And this one has a lot going for it, but that verse melody and then the chorus kicks in and it's just as good. And something that he does, which is sort of hard to explain, is that he's able to create an infectious feel in a song without even a real melody. Sometimes it's like, it almost sounds like just accompaniment or what might be like a counter melody without a real melody.
Yeah.
But it's just as infectious. Like the chorus part in this song is almost not even a main melody. It's almost like backup singers. You know what I mean? And it's just as catchy.
Right, like the quote-unquote lead instrument is almost kind of just adding flavor to the rhythm that's there.
Right, exactly. That's exactly right. And he does a lot of that. In addition to writing strong melodies, catchy melodies, he does this sort of thing too. And a lot of his stuff, there's one track in particular we'll get to later that is particularly like that, which is also my favorite Linzner track, which is interesting.
Fancy.
This is sort of the first track of his I recognize as, this is awesome. Yeah, this is great. What do you think about it?
I am totally in agreement with you. I love this one. The backbeat is fantastic. To me, it almost feels like an early heroic kind of RPG track, especially when that lead keyboard comes in. It has this kind of soaring heroic feel to it.
Yep.
And even though this game is kind of a Star Fox style shoot 'em up game, I think this particular track is almost like a Guile's theme. It really can be used with almost anything and still sound really good or enhance the mood of whatever it is that you're playing at the time. As far as Game Boy Advance music goes, it sounds amazing.
Yep, as good as it gets, pretty much.
Yeah, it doesn't have that grittiness that a lot of the other Game Boy Advance games have. So, in the past, I've used cleaner rips of Game Boy Advance games to kind of make them sound as the composer originally intended. And that's because most Game Boy Advance games use a sound engine called SAPI. And there are specific tools that have been created to basically disassemble SAPI music and then reassemble it more cleanly. Linzner and his team at Shin'en created their own audio engine for the Game Boy Advance called GAX, which is why it sounds so good, I think. He just was able to circumvent a lot of that crappy filteriness that you get on a lot of other Game Boy Advance games without having to do extra work on a computer to clean it up like that. So it sounds great. It looks great. The game was programmed by Linzner himself alone.
Oh, this one was? I didn't know that about this one.
Yep. He had, other team members doing art and, other assets and stuff. But all the programming was done by him. It's basically behind the ship where enemies are coming towards you, kind of like a cross between like Star Fox and Space Harrier, I guess is the best way to describe it. But the backgrounds are all really detailed, full motion video, and you're flying through these kinds of patterns of like sci-fi futuristic tubes, or you're going over clouds, like through a sunset with like clouds like below you moving really fast, and then clouds above you that are just kind of slow and gradually like swirling above you. It's a really beautiful game, and it takes place in a lot of different environments. It's super colorful, like it's gorgeous to look at. The game itself is kind of on the basic side, but I think this was really kind of a technical showpiece that they kind of wrapped a game around, more or less.
Yeah, it has a it starts to feel stale pretty quickly because your ship can move, like you said, you're behind the ship, and it can move all around the screen. It's sort of like an over-the-shoulder view, I guess, if that would apply to a spaceship. And your ship can move anywhere on the screen, but it keeps its position. It's like horizontal position, and it's kind of awkward when you move around, and the ship isn't actually like, it's not like sweeping to the side at like a curve or anything. It doesn't do anything. You know how like with like Gyrus, your ship kind of like there's like a radius that it sort of covers.
Your ship is more like a cursor.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah. It is fun. It's very difficult. Sometimes it feels like it's difficult for the wrong reasons. Whereas like a lot of shmups are more like, like if you die, it's just because you didn't memorize that barrage of enemies quite yet.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And this one, it just kind of feels like sometimes it's a little cheaper, but it's still fun. It's not as good as its sequel, but very different game, which we'll talk about after this. Actually, when I think about this game, it always makes me think of this. And if anyone listening has an experience with this same game, that'll make me giddy. But I used to have this handheld Tommytronic game called Planet Zion, which was it's sort of like a binocular thing that you would hold up to your eyes, and it was like a Viewmaster, but it was like a backlit, and it was colorful, but it was like pre-established, locate lights that would just turn on and off.
Okay.
Wherever you were, and your ship kind of traced along the bottom and along the top, and enemies would come at you sort of in that same kind of way.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so when I play Iridian 3D, it always makes me think of that, and I get really nostalgic playing a game I had no experience playing when I was younger. It's just because it always reminds me of Planet Zion. Or was it Planet Xeon? You know what? Planet Xeon. I'm going to say it's Planet Xeon.
It's very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll have to look that up on the web. I'm sure somebody's got images of it somewhere.
Yeah, it's really old, but I'm pretty sure I would still have a lot of fun with it. It's a pretty solid game for the type of game it is.
Cool. Well, yeah, like you said, Iridion 2 did come out a couple years later and improved on a lot of things. And we'll get to that as we go through this show. We've got a couple more games ahead of that one, though. Maybe not such great games, though, but really good music. So
Yeah.
Next up, we're going to listen to a track called Welcome to Fila Decathlon from the game Fila Decathlon. This again came out on the Game Boy Advance a year later in 2002, composed by the man of the hour, Manfred Linzner. Be right back. fade to black from that sports montage. That was
Absolutely.
Welcome to Fila Decathlon from the game Fila Decathlon, released on the Game Boy Advance in 2002. Music by Manfred Linzner. And yes, 80s sports montage is probably the best description I can give to at least the beginning, like the first half of the song. The second half gets a little more demo scene-y, a little more melodic, which I think is my favorite part of it.
Yeah.
But it takes a lot of the elements from the first half and kind of makes them a little more, and like enhances them, I guess is the best way I can describe them. Makes it a lot more listenable. Well, why did you choose this particular one for the show?
Well, first, if you hadn't said the sports montage, I definitely would have. I mean, that's out of an 80s movie or like a commercial.
It's kind of unavoidable. Like, you're going to hear this one, you're going to think
absolutely. Which is clearly what he was going for.
Right.
But I have to confess that the reason I picked this track, the main reason, is because really in my heart, what I really wanted was a Iridian episode. He just has such an enjoyable variety of things. This track sounds a lot like in addition to being like an 80s movie sports montage, sounds like it could be in an Iridian game to me. Like without that plotting feel, it's definitely got the same kind of sound. It has even some of the the melody sounds like something from one of those games. It was just kind of a cheat track for me because I really love it, but it also kind of, there were other games I could have picked from that kind of like throw a little more variety, but I just like the way this kind of puts me in the mind of Iridian in like an 80s movie, which both things I love.
I also want to say that I appreciate that the songs that you picked from a couple of these games, so that GAX sound engine that I was talking about, which Linzner used on all of his Game Boy Advance games, it's not popular enough that a lot of people from around the web have like disassembled Game Boy Advance games to extract music from these soundtracks. So for instance, like this game, the game we're going to play next, like there aren't any of those kind of traditional Game Boy Advance soundtracks laying around on the web that I could just kind of pluck and convert to music for the podcast. So the tracks that you picked from these games have been like the title theme track, so I could just kind of like start up an emulator, let the song play, and record it. And you didn't make me have to play through the entire game to get like the level 5 track or something like that.
Yeah. A lot of times that's the case, and not just in the case of Manfred Linzner, but I think a lot of times, the best tracks are often used for the first track you hear.
Yeah.
Or like the first stage or something. And I think with games like this, they don't have particularly expansive soundtracks, you know what I mean? There aren't that many, like with like a track and field type of game, with the exception of Track and Field 2, which has like 60 tracks in it or something like that.
All really good.
Yeah. There's like a main track, and there's like a, you fail or you succeed track, and like an ending theme, you know what I mean? This one stood out to me for sure. Yeah.
This one is one of the ones that he did not do any programming on. It was developed by a dev house called Athletic Design AB out of Germany. So they probably hired him on just because he was local and can throw some, music in pretty easily.
Yep.
Do you know if this ever got an American release? Because I don't remember ever hearing about this in the States. Of course, there were a lot of Game Boy Advance games, so...
To be honest, I had just assumed it was. I didn't know.
Yeah, you might be right. I mean, it was published by THQ International, so International might clue me in that it was released by them in a whole bunch of different countries. I didn't hear of it. I played a little bit of it just to see what the game was all about, and
looks good.
It looks fantastic. The animation is outstanding. There's really nice 3D effects. All of the games are side-scrolling, so it's mostly track. I mean, it's Decathlon, so obviously it's going to be a lot of running. The gameplay and the gameplay design is what really throws me off, because in all the games you have to run by alternatively pressing A and B as fast as you can, and then
came up with that.
Right, and then for like the long jump, for instance, you have to press up on the D-pad to jump, and the longer you hold it down, kind of similar to Track and Field 2, the longer you hold it down, the higher your angle is. Yeah. But the fact that you have to press A and B so fast, like you have to put one thumb on A and one thumb on B, to even get to like the orange zone from a meter that goes from green to red. And then somehow you have to get those two thumbs, or one of the thumbs, from one side of the console to the other side of the D-pad to press up to jump. And it was like, I found it impossible. So what I was doing was like pressing A and B. I was on an emulator and I was using a PlayStation 4 controller. I was pressing A and B with two thumbs, and then I would just try to kind of like mash up with my palm from my right hand, from my left hand, which kind of worked, but I didn't have the control over how long I was holding the button down. It was a mess. I was like, how could you do this with a screen in the middle of your controller on a Game Boy Advance? Like, it just didn't make any sense how...
I don't...
You know...
I mean, at least with, like, NES games and stuff like Track and Field 2, I mean, a lot of that stuff requires you to do ridiculous things like that. Maybe not quite to that extent, but at least you have the option of turbo controllers and stuff.
Right.
Like, it... And in fact, I never even really thought about that. Like, with, like, handhelds, there's no... If you don't have turbo, you're
screwed. So I don't know how they expected the players to be able to mash buttons that hard and still be able to do the other button presses that were required. Thinking about it now, I could probably remap up on the D-pad to the L or the R shoulder button, so I could just mash really hard with my two thumbs and then just use my index finger on my right hand to hit the jump button, so I can do it all on one side of the controller. But if I have to remap...
Let's face it, you're not going to go through the trouble.
No, I'm not going to go back and play this game because it doesn't really offer that much. But, I mean, this is just kind of an example of a game where they just didn't really think about how to actually play it when they put it out. So I saw some reviews, at least on Moby Games, they gave a couple of reviews of it, and it got like a 55 out of 100 and a 65 out of 100. Like, obviously, this game was not really well received when it came out. So again, it's one of those things that's like really impressive looking, but I think they dumped all of the R&D into presentation and not much into the gameplay itself.
Yeah, like you said, the animations are really nice. There's one in particular that kind of struck me as particularly impressive, when at the end of a long jump, when you land and then you get back up, like you turn, and like when you rotate to get back up, like it shows like every muscle and everything as the guy like kind of rolls over, and it's like, it's like more impressive than it has any business being.
Yep. There's a shot put too, and just the animation of the guy like stretching out and then leaning back and then throwing the shot. It's really awesome looking. So check out video of it if you can, because playing it, you're probably not going to have a very good time. But yeah, we've got some more not great games on the way. Next up is the credits theme from Frogger Advance, The Great Quest. This also came out on the Game Boy Advance in 2002. Let's hit it. And we're back. That was the credits theme from Frogger Advance, The Great Quest, released on the Game Boy Advance in 2002. Very jazzy, very swingy tune. Not a lot like a lot of the other pieces of music that are on this soundtrack. from this game. This was also co-composed with Todd Maston. The gameplay themes in a lot of this game are very different sounding. So I'm pretty sure that Maston composed a lot of those, had more of like a medieval kind of a cinematic feel to it. This is definitely a Linzner piece. I'm sure you'll agree with me on that.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
What do you like about this one?
It just has a nice groove to it, because you kind of just like chill to it. It's not especially complex or interesting, but it just has a really nice feel. Gets you bopping a little bit. I like the bass a lot, the that punchy bass, slappy bass sound. And it kind of, it definitely has his sound, but it kind of stands out a bit to me amongst his Game Boy Advance stuff, so I figured it was a good thing to throw in there.
Yeah.
You know, I knew there was going to be a lot of Game Boy Advance tracks in this, but within that, it was figured it'd be nice to have a little bit of variety. And while this does sound like him, it definitely has a unique kind of sound to it, I think.
Yeah, and this was definitely a game made for kids, so I think he had that in mind when he was making this tune. Again, to me, it sounds very demo scene, but it sounds kind of childlike in a sense too. It's got that very, like you said, that kind of funky boom bump, boom bump, boom bump, boom bump kind of bass line, and some really like high pitched, twinkly keyboard leads over it. So
I think it's like a piano, I think.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. So this game was developed by Team Angry Robot, not Shin'en, which were most of Linzner's compositions, as he was co-founder of the company. So, yeah. But I don't know. These guys are European. This was developed for Konami and published by Konami of America. This Frogger Great Quest series of games came out on the Game Boy Advance. I think that was also released on the PS2 and possibly the GameCube. But those versions of the games had completely different soundtracks from a different composer altogether. So I think this is the only Frogger game that Linzner wrote any music for. And did you play this game at all?
Again, it's one that I watched some footage as much as I could tolerate anyway.
I did the same thing. I was like, I watched video and I'm like, I don't need to play this. This is terrible.
I think if you're under the age of 30, you might not have played like Frogger, an original Frogger game. But if you know about Frogger, basically take everything you know about Frogger and throw it out the window. And then imagine Donkey Kong Country, but really, really bad.
Yeah.
You know, it sort of has that pre-rendered sprite kind of look to it, but it doesn't look nearly as good. It's a lot grainier. The sprites are way too big. So like you can't see like 2 inches in front of your face to predict oncoming enemies and stuff, although it doesn't look like it's difficult. So I don't think that would be an issue, but it just kind of looks bad. It looks very sluggish, very clunky.
And it's basically a collectathon too. You just run around these kind of open
giant coins.
Yeah, these giant coins and gems and diamonds and stuff, and you can't get the good ending unless you've like literally collected every single thing there is in the game, of which there's like 2,000 different items to collect as you go through these levels. So
it all looks very typical. I mean, you know, there's a ladder, climb it. There's a platform, jump onto it.
Right.
Get the coin and then jump onto another platform.
There's an enemy, bop on its head.
Yeah.
So nothing special, except for some really good music. So
for sure,
that's the reason why we're sharing it here.
Yep.
All right, man. Ready for the next song?
I am.
What you got for us?
So here we go. This is Iridian 2. The track is called Good to Feel. This was a very hard pick for me because there were 5 or 6 songs off of this one that I struggled with. I would have liked to pick them all, but this is the one I settled on. It's Game Boy Advance 2003. Let's check that out. Welcome back. That was Good to Feel from Iridian 2 and the Game Boy Advance from 2003. Composed by Manfred Janslin.
He's like the Benedict Cumberbatch of VGM composers.
The Engelbert Humperdinck. Yeah. So this whole OST is, you can't make a bad choice with anyone on here. And I struggled, like I said earlier, I struggled with picking one from this one. I really wanted to pick one of the ones that had like a really driving, heroic, good mood kind of feel. And this was definitely one of them. And it has that for the first couple portions of the song. And then it kind of like moves to that other part, which has a lot more of it has more of a feeling of determination.
A little more serious, yeah.
Yeah. And the little transition it does where it sort of, as it's shifting to that part, really kind of just like transforms the song and gives it a totally different feel, but maintains that driving feel that it has. And again, it goes into just a fantastic melody, changes mood, and then brings you right back into that heroic feel that it has. And I just love it. I love this is like peak Linzner to me.
Yeah, and the more I listen to his music, it's kind of dawning on me exactly what you're saying, really how good he is at being able to change mood within one piece, but still keep the flow going, and being able to transfer back, because, VGM obviously loops, so being able to transfer into one mood and then bring it right back into the original mood, and then, be able to flux back and forth like that without really jarring the listener that much. It's very, very good.
And it's got that, that galloping bass we all love.
Of course.
Which is
and that's like par for the course for shoot 'em ups. Like that's just kind of like a trope, I guess, in that music. So
yeah, it just lends itself well to that sort of gameplay.
Yeah, exactly. This is another game that Linzner wrote all the code for. He and his other Shin'en co-founder, I think his name is Bernard. It's pronounced Bernard Vodok, Wodok. The two of them together did most code for most games. Vodok is actually the coder who wrote the GAX sound engine that Linzner uses on all his GBA games. But he also wrote all the tools and the front-end code for this game as well, along with some other artists and, background design and stuff. But most of this game is all Linzner and Vodok. And it's crazy how impressive this game is for like two people doing 80% of the work.
It's gorgeous in terms of audio and gameplay. It's a beautiful game. Very different than the first one. It's a totally different perspective. And I have not played it.
Oh, you really should. It is really fun.
I own the first one. I played the first one. And I've seen, many videos over the years of it. It's just one of those games I always look out for when I'm at like a expo or something. And I have never seen it. One of these days I'll pick it up and I'll play it and I'll suck at it. And it'll be fun. I can't wait.
It's definitely a game that you can tell is at least by the same people that made the original Iridion 3D, even though they've changed it from a Star Fox style behind the ship to more of a traditional vertical. It's kind of like vertical, but you're kind of still going into the screen. It's kind of like an overhead isometric kind of a vertical shooter, if that makes sense.
It's kind of diagonal.
There's a bit of depth to it. It's basically like you took the camera from Iridion 3D and just raised it up like 40 feet, and kind of angled it down at the action. You play in a traditional 2D vertical scrolling shooter type manner, but all the backgrounds again are the same style full motion video where there's looping backgrounds and a lot of really just gorgeous artwork, and then they take two-dimensional sprites but kind of warp them to look like they have depth and scroll them in time with the background so that it looks like they're kind of floating in the middle of these big tubes that you're flying through. It's really a technical marvel, and this one actually has the gameplay to back up all the really nice music and visuals that you're looking at the same time. So this is all around a great package of a game.
I've said 100 times, but I really stink at shmups, but I'm fascinated by them. I love the idea. I love the idea of a shmup. I love the energy of those games. There are very few that I've really enjoyed. I've really gotten into and played. Like Axelay is one that I love, and I can make it to the end in easy mode. and that's about the best. That's about the best I can do in a shmup. But I really want to play Iridian 2, and one of these days I will. I know I'll be terrible at it, but I need the experience of playing.
Yeah, and I'm sure it will not let you down. It's really, really good. It's a good level of challenge, and like shmups are just games that you really have to play a lot and learn the patterns and learn where enemies are and learn what weapon is going to work the best in which area. So the more you play, the better you'll get.
Yeah, I guess so. I think with shmups, I really don't know what it is. Like, there are times when I just kind of like, oh, this is really awesome, and then I'll die like 12 times in the same spot, and then I just kind of lose, I just kind of decide, I guess I'm just not very good at this, and I just don't have the focus to keep at it. You know what I mean?
Well, the next game we got coming up is another Game Boy Advance game, not coded by Linzner. However, he did write the music. Around this time, 2004, Shin'en started hiring themselves out to other companies, specifically for music and maybe a little bit of art and programming here and there. So he was actually credited for this game as Shin'en. This is the title/map/credits theme from Action Man Robot Attack, again released on the GBA in 2004.
That was the title/map/credits theme from Action Man Robot Attack on the Game Boy Advance 2004, composed by Manfred Jarnston.
Moonbeam Llama Head.
I don't know about you, but my only Action Man game I'm familiar with is the Search for Base X on the Game Boy Color.
Yes.
The Iko Mizutani one.
And I only learned about that through Mike from XVGM.
Yeah. Me too, yeah. This is a very different, obviously musically it's very different. Those two guys are very different, both tremendous composers. But this one is the music is very different. It's a very different game. I played that Search for Base X game and I didn't like it very much. This one I haven't played, but it looks a lot more fun. It's a more like fast-paced, kind of more of a run and gun, really. Like it looks like an action platformer at first glance, but the gameplay is more like you're just running, actually pretty fast. You just run in like just with various types of weapons, bows and arrows and swords and guns and whatever you have, and there's like different characters.
It kind of reminded me a little bit of like Ninja Gaiden, where you can attack. You have projectile attacks, but you also have melee attacks, but you don't need to. Yeah. Or maybe more like the Messenger, because at least in the Messenger, you don't have to stop while you're attacking, whereas in Ninja Gaiden, you kind of stop while you attack, but you could basically run through a dude, like punch him in the face, and he'll explode like behind you.
Without losing any momentum.
Yeah, you can speedrun this game really easily, I'm pretty sure.
Right. Yeah, it looks really fun.
Yeah, and then there's also kind of flashback style jumping mechanics, where if you hold up while you jump, you can jump at a platform and then quickly pull yourself up and just keep going forward. Right, so it really helps you keep that momentum going throughout the game. So it's neat, and it's a neat mechanic that I haven't seen on a lot of like 16-bit video games, especially back in 2004 with that kind of speed mentality to it. So it was cool. I haven't played much of this. I only played like the first couple of levels just kind of to get familiar with it for the show, but it's something that I think I might want to go back to and check out a little bit. I'm not really familiar with the Action Man property. I guess it's a cartoon series or toys or something.
I think it's been different things at different times. I think this game in particular if I'm remembering what I read correctly, is based off of a cartoon series or something that was actually called Robot Attack, I think.
Oh, okay. There were different Action Man series.
Yeah, I've seen different iterations with certain iterations of Action Man look very serious and sort of almost like Solid Snake kind of thing. But this one looks kind of like a little goofy. Like there's like different versions of it, from what I can tell.
Interesting.
Yeah, this is a pretty cool soundtrack. This one plays a lot throughout the game in different places. It moves around a lot. The parts kind of shifts around. The tone kind of changes a bit, but it sort of like that Iridian 2 track, but obviously nothing like it in terms of how it sounds. But it moves around, kind of changes tone a bit. I like the transitions, the way it progresses. The chord progressions are interesting. When I first heard it, I wasn't totally into it at first, but when it started moving around a bit, I really started liking it. And this one has sort of become one of my favorites of his.
I think the pacing of the song really kind of lends itself towards what the game is like. For a song this fast to appear in like a menu theme, the game wants to keep you running.
Or a map.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, even though this isn't like a gameplay theme, it could definitely work as a gameplay theme as well.
Yeah, like you stop after a stage and unroll your map to check it out, and it's still and you're just like, whoa, just gotta find out where I'm going.
I am mapping to the extreme.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So this was developed by Magic Pockets to add a little more international flavor to the show. This was a development company that was based in France. Actually, I think they're still around, if I'm not mistaken. They were a subsidiary of PAM Entertainment, but then they were bought by Take-Two Interactive in July of 2005. So shortly after this game came out, they became part of Take-Two. Magic Pockets also developed and marketed its own Magic Pockets DS engine. So they developed technology that other developers would use to make their own DS games, which is pretty cool. So I guess these guys knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
Very interesting. It definitely has that kind of European flavor to the game. I think it's one of those kind of very artful but low on animation kind of games that I really kind of attribute to a lot of the European stuff from around there.
Yeah, it looks really nice, but it's maybe not that
a little
impressive
clunky,
visually, but it's colorful and it looks like it plays well.
Yeah, I can see myself enjoying this one quite a bit, actually. All right, so we have a couple more games up. This is actually a Shin'en game coming up next. What do we have, sir?
We have my very favoritist Manfred Linzner track. It's called Sekai Outpost from Nanostray on the DS from 2005. Dig it.
Sweet.
Welcome back. That jam you just heard was Sekai Outpost from Nanostray on the DS 2005, composed by Manfred. This is my favorite of his works. This song, when I first heard it, I was checking out a new Manfred Linzner soundtrack I hadn't heard, and kind of going through the tracks, and they were very good, obviously. Wasn't quite hitting me like, Iridian 2, maybe a little more polished because of the DS hardware. And then this song starts, and it's just kind of grooving along, and it's cool. It's got that really kind of driving heroic feel that I love. But it wasn't really going anywhere. Little did I know that it was building. Like it's just building and building, and the song builds for like a minute and 20 something.
Yeah.
And then it kind of modulates up and goes to that section that just like, it's like, oh, we're going somewhere. And every time I hear this track at that part, it's like 120 something. I get goosebumps every time I listen to this song. It goes to that spot, and then it kind of keeps climbing. And then the apex of the song kind of builds in like a climax, and then it just keeps going. And it just, it goes through that build again. And this is sort of what I was talking. Well, it's exactly what I was talking about before, where this song is fantastic, and it gets to the best point in the song of my favorite Manfred Linzner song. I can't say Manfred Linzner song.
Yeah, tongue twister.
It gets to this point where it's just amazing, and there's hardly a melody to speak. I mean, sure, that's melodic, but to me, it sounds like there should be like a main melody over it.
Okay, yep.
That could just be the way it hits my ears, and it's so simple because it sort of repeats, and what's changing is the backing stuff, the chords in the back, like that. Mm-hmm. That's just sort of like, again,
like flavor, like what you talked about earlier. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and it like repeats through like the whole song. On its own, doesn't sound like much, but when the chords start moving in the background, it transforms into this like super moving, super heroic track. And this is like, I would put this in like my top 10 VGM tracks, probably.
That's impressive.
Yeah, well, I mean, I say that, but if I really thought about it, I probably realized, there's actually like 20 that I like. but I mean, when I think about it, I just like this. This is definitely one of my favorites. It's just great. I can't say enough good about it.
Yeah, I feel like he had a little bit more freedom to compose on the DS, especially since the DS sequence music engine is basically just MIDI. Like, you can compose in any sort of MIDI composer you want to, and then easily export it to play on the DS. So he had that going for him. We didn't have to worry about any limitations or, funky trackers for the GBA. And then having the ability to play back the music without needing to crunch down those samples helped the tones become a lot more rich as well. And also, it's a much longer track. I feel like he just had more room to work with.
Yeah.
The levels in Nanostray are a little bit longer than you'd see on the Iridian series, so he had some more time that he could stretch out where the player would still be able to hear the entire song and to be able to build up. So one of the great things, I think, about these Shin'en games, Iridion, Nanostray, all the games that they made, is that Linzner's programming the game, also writing the music for it. So he's not just a composer that's coming in and being shown a couple of screenshots of a game in development and going, okay, I've got to make some music to match that. Like, he literally knows what he's doing. He knows the exact pace he's working in. He knows how long it's going to be, so he can easily match the music to the tone of the game. And I think he did that really, really well for this stage, because things like Nanostray uses polygonal backgrounds. Finally, it's like something that they've wanted to do forever on the GBA, and they've just like emulated it the best they could.
Yeah.
But now the levels are actually kind of sweeping around corners, and there's hills and stuff. So
it's cool.
Those build-ups really kind of flow in with the turns and stuff that the game is making. So all in all, it's almost like composing for film, but your film is a game that you're playing in a timed interval. So to be able to do that, program the game, and like make music that perfectly interacts with it, like, that's pure talent right there. It's really hard to do that, I'm sure.
He's clearly an underachiever.
Oh, yes. Big slacker.
Yeah. This, I think this game has a lot. It sort of takes and kind of builds upon Iridian 2.
Hmm?
You know, it has a similar presentation.
Top-ish down kind of
Yeah,
shooter.
top-ish, downish. This is one of the few on here from this episode that I actually own. And shocker, I suck at it. But yeah, the levels have a lot going on in them, and they're not. One thing I like about this game, and I feel like it's the same with Iridian 2, though I haven't really played it, seen it, is that it's not really a bullet hell, really. Like it seems to rely more on like what enemies on the screen are doing and how they're moving and how you have to like avoid them and maneuver around them. Perhaps a little more than you have to avoid bullets, although there's plenty of that too. And like there's a lot of like really cool enemies in this game that are also like environmental obstacles. Like in this level, I think there's like these giant like mechanical whale things that are just sort of like lumbering around you, and you have to like weave through them.
Yeah, they're almost like giant islands, but they're
yeah. And the way they like twirl and move, it just looks so cool. And it's just like you're playing the game and you're like trying to focus and like not get hit, but at the same time you're taking in like the visuals. And it's like, I think that's, you know what? I'm sort of realizing this now. That's probably one of the reasons I suck at shmups, is because like I'm just admiring it as I'm playing.
Too much to look at.
This is so cool. Which is why I'm pretty sure I can never play Einhander.
Oh yeah.
I really want that game, but I don't think I would last 3 seconds in that
There's
game.
a lot of pretty
gorgeous
stuff to look at in that game.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's the glory of YouTube now, is that you can not only use YouTube to see other people who are really good at the game play it and kind of get tips from their gameplay, but you can also just visually take in all the stuff that you're looking at. So maybe it won't be so distracting the next time you go through it. So I don't know. I don't use it that much for that, but I feel like it's something that you could.
I don't either.
Yeah, as far as the background, like programming and stuff, again, Bernard, Voduk, and Linzner did all of the work as far as menu game tools, enemy and boss programming, all the stuff that you see, like moving around on the screen, is all Linzner and Voduk. They had the graphics team obviously do all the backgrounds and the enemy designs and stuff, but the meat of the game is all them. Manfred Linzner, of course, did all the music and the sound effects as well. So I think Linzner also did some weapon design and a little bit of the graphic work himself as well. So definitely a man of all trades. And I think this is one of their crowning achievements as far as the handheld stuff goes. We're going to move into what I think is one of my favorite games from Shin'en, and like literally a marvel of technology that's kind of underrated for the console. We're going to listen to a track called Alpine Trust, and this is from Fast Racing Neo. This came out on the Wii U in 2015. Be right back.
that was Alpine Trust from Fast Racing Neo on the Wii U from 2005, composed by Manfred Linzner from our best assessment. There are multiple composers on here, and we weren't able to really find specific credits, but to me this definitely sounds like a Linzner composition, so we're going to go ahead and call it that.
Yeah, to the best of our knowledge. It's Martin Schioler and another gentleman by the name of Bulin that also wrote music for this soundtrack. And even the official release of the soundtrack on Shin'en's own website does not include individual composer credits.
Yeah.
But I feel like, the whole Fast Racing Neo soundtrack is pretty coherent, even though there's 3 different composers. So even if, Linzner by some chance didn't write this music, it's very indicative of the rest of the music that's on there. So you'll get a good taste of the style of music that he's writing for this series of games, So of all the music that's on this soundtrack, why'd you pick this one?
It hooks me. It just hooks me. It hooks me more. It's the part with that guitar, that shreddy, super fast arpeggiating guitar comes in. I love that. I love that so much that it made me pick the track, because to be honest, I really don't like anything else about it. I mean, I like the energy about it, and it might sound weird that I would pick it, but I love that section so much.
It's very Barry Leach, I noticed. It's like really like up and down and like frenetic, arpeggiated notes all over the place. It really reminds me of a lot of his Horizon Chase or Top Gun soundtracks.
Yeah, another composer that I'm not that crazy about. But I love that. I love how, again, it fits the game so well.
Yeah.
It's just this game is just crazy. Like to me anyway, from what I've seen, I haven't played it, but it's just like super fast, intense, sort of like a adrenaline rush inducing, really well designed racing game. Just extreme things happening just all over the place. It's got really tremendous sound design all around. The effects are really loud and kind of in your face, but they sound good, so they're not just like noisy effects. And it all just sort of plays into what appears to be the experience of the game.
Yeah, it is a Wipeout style game. So you have floating cars, ships, whatever you want to call them, like magnetically levitating over a track. And the tracks are shorter and less roller coastery, I guess, than the Wipeout tracks, but it has an element of color manipulation similar to like Silhouette Mirage or Ikaruga, or like one of those kind of games where you have to switch your ship's affinity back and forth from orange to blue, and there are different patches on the track that are either orange or blue, so you got to make sure that you are switched to whichever color it is that's on the track for a speed boost. Otherwise, if you're orange and you run over a blue patch, it's going to slow you down a little bit. So you can really get into some rhythms sometime where you're going around this like huge corner and the patches just alternate orange, blue. So you're like constantly just switching in time with the colors that are on the track, all the while, trying to keep ahead of the competition and sliding around these corners. So if you get really good at the game, it feels really good. It feels almost as much of a rhythm game as it does a racing game. And it's a really neat concept that they've added to just, what is more of a generic kind of futuristic racer that makes the game feel very different and very fun.
Yeah, that's a mechanic that I've seen used to pretty good effect at times, where you're switching from one color to another, or one symbol to another or something, to allow yourself passage through a particular spot. Isn't the next Penelope like that? That was one we talked about in another episode. I thought that had...
Oh, yeah, you're right. I think that was kind of similar.
It had a similar mechanic involved. It might not have been the core mechanic of the game, but I like that. I played... There's that one game I think I told you about a while ago called Polara. It's like a runner where it's just switching from blue to red to pass through and keep going. If you switch to blue and you run into red, you die. And you just keep running.
It's a cool concept that can be applied to like almost every single game genre. Which is pretty neat.
Yeah, and put to a racing game, it seems to really make a lot of sense.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the things that these games are known for are being very well optimized for the systems that they're running on. So the original game was called Fast Racing League, and it was released as WiiWare on the Wii console. and it was a console quality 60 frame per second, Wipeout style racer, but it was like an extremely small game. It came in under like 256 megabytes, and it had a full soundtrack, a full set of, tracks that you could play with multiple ships, and it felt like a 3 gigabyte game, but like was a downloadable WiiWare title. So people really took notice of that. And then the same with this game. Again, now they've upgraded it. It's high def. There's even more tracks. There's even more music. Still kept it underneath the gigabyte. I'm not sure how big they went with Fast RMX, which is I think it came out on the Wii U and the Switch, if I'm not mistaken. But again, 60 frames per second, constant frame rate. Really, really good game. Much smaller download size than a game of its, comparable ilk. So I think Manfred Linzner and Vodek did a lot to kind of optimize all of the code for the game to make it as small as possible and to run as well as possible. Yeah. So they're really talented guys.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I'd much rather play fast racing than slow racing. Otherwise known as Stunt Race FX.
Yes. That's more like choppy racing or laggy racing.
Yeah, or you may as well not be racing.
I'm probably the only guy that you're going to talk to that would actually defend Stunt Race effects for some of that stuff.
No, I have a friend that has a nostalgic affinity for it.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's the nostalgia part of it.
Yeah,
but
if you like driving pushing a bathtub on top of ice, then it's your kind of game.
It's like a janky cardboard box.
Yeah, with eyes.
But that goes to show you how far racing games have come in 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
Or so. Now we're packing in amazing graphics and frame rates to systems and still making it downloadable. So anyways, yeah, a fantastic game, fantastic soundtrack. Whether the music is from Schioler or Bulin or Linzner, the music just rocks. It's balls to the wall, really danceable techno, very frenetic, goes right in time with the extreme pace of the racing. The Fast RMX soundtrack is even better, has even more tracks, and some new tracks from Linzner and some old ones from the previous two games as well. So definitely check that one out if you got a Switch.
I can't help but think also that even if this isn't one of his compositions, he had so much to do with the game, and he has such a catalog behind him that I wonder if he wasn't an influence on the other two anyway, you know what I mean? Or he directed their, pushed them in the direction to get with his sound, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and he's not credited as music director, but I would have to assume that he was.
Yeah.
Because, he's basically the executive producer of the game, and he's writing some of the music for it, so I would assume that he would be the one in charge of getting other composers to come in and do the music. So he would have to have chosen them because they fit a style that he wants to include in the game. So yeah, if it's not him, then he definitely had an influence on the selection or production of the track itself.
I would say so.
We're just apologizing for ourselves, basically.
I am as confident as I can be, though, that it was him. I mean, it has a Linzner flavor to it. It's palpable.
Well, maybe someday we will find out. Yeah. At least I know he did all the sound effects for the game. He's the only one credited for that.
And he's very good at that.
Yeah,
like I said,
absolutely.
The sound design overall in this game is fantastic.
So that about wraps it up. We are going to close out the show with a demo scene track from Linzner under his demo scene name Pink, which I really enjoyed. It was a release at Revision 2019, again for his demo group called Abyss. It's a demo called Coda, which he completely coded and wrote all the music for by himself. He wrote the tracker that he composed the music on. It was called Pre-Tracker, and it took second place in the Amiga intro competition. So Coda is comprised of two songs, a longer one called Hyper Lucky, followed up by a shorter one called Plastic Dove. So that'll be following at the end of the show. Make sure you stay tuned for that. And to wrap things up, Cam, this was awesome. I learned a lot about Linzner, especially from games that I'd never heard of before.
Yeah. Me too. To
hear some cool music and just to see how much more he is for games than just a composer, and how much, it's not I just did some art for this game, but also wrote the music. I made the game and also the music.
Or at least dictated where the game, the vision of the game, and pulled it all together and kept it within the parameters that he had a vision for.
Yeah, for sure. I wish there were more interviews with him on the web. There are a lot from like his really early demo scene days. I found a few where he was like 18 years old and just talking about like, the Amiga was still current and he was still composing on that. And then I found a whole bunch more from like 1 or 2 years ago, which were kind of asking about new games coming out, which he wasn't necessarily composing music for, and he was just talking about game production and not speaking as a composer. But there's really nothing where he's like just sitting down and talking about his Game Boy Advance and DS and stuff. So I don't know, hopefully maybe someday we'll find something that goes into a little bit more detail that we can share on the VG Embassy website or the Discord or something like that.
Maybe we'll do a Linzner Part 2 and we'll have him on.
That would be cool. So thank you for sharing some Linzner music. I hope you had a good time.
I did, in fact, have a good time.
So I guess you would say, usually at the end of the show, we talk about our favorites from the show, but I'm going to assume that Sakai Outpost is going to take that.
Well, being that that's
that
what
credit.
I told you, it's not so much an assumption as much as it is a reiteration. Yes. Yeah, it's just a tremendous track to me. The Iridian 2 one's close behind it, but Sakai Outpost is just...
Yeah,
banger.
It's a fantastic track. I actually really like the credits track from Frogger Advance as
groovy.
well.
Yep.
It kind of hit me out of nowhere, and just the whole demo scene feel of it, I think, was really good.
Cool.
Linzner as Pink never stopped writing music for the demo scene, and he, alongside being a game developer and game composer, would continually submit demo scene intros and cracktros and just chiptune music to demo scene parties all over the world, simultaneously. So he's continued to be in the scene and contributing to it and supporting to it, which I think is really cool.
That's awesome.
Not like a lot of the other demo sceners that kind of like once they got into game music, they kind of separated themselves from it.
They move on to another aspect of design, and then they kind of leave the music behind them and move on to the next thing, kind of thing.
Right. He's kind of stayed within that whole range, plus adding more to his plate, which is very cool. Plus developing a lot of tools that other demo sceners used to make music, which is very cool as well. So it was super influential on the whole scene, super influential on games as far as, especially handheld games go. So really kind of pushing the boundaries of technology for all of that stuff.
Yeah, he's a nerd.
Yeah. The good kind of nerd, the best kind of nerd. The game developer nerd. So, as always, I'd like to thank Indira J for the art, Trevin Hughes, aka Dread, for the podcast theme song. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/thevgembassy. You can head over to Twitter, twitter.com/thevgembassy, to check us out on there. Also, we are on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play Music, anywhere that cool podcasts are found. You can head over to patreon.com/thevgembassy and check out our Patreon page, where you can learn how you can take part in shows for a small little donation per month to help keep the show running and sounding as awesome as it is. And
That sounds awesome.
Speaking of which, I'd like to thank our Patreon patrons, and I'll do this ASMR style. Cameron Childs, aka Bruce Irons of the Mad Gear. Michael Bridgewater from the Forever Sound version VGM podcast. Donovan Orofino, and Chris Murray. Our VG emissaries, Chris Myers, John Jekyll, aka Mix Six Master, Ben the Dyad Dishman from the Dyad Presents, a VGM podcast.
Love that VGM book.
Chris Steenerson from the VG Jam podcast. Jordan Werme, hey, you know him, from the Table to Stage podcast. It's your big bro.
I heard we're related.
I heard. It's not a very common last name. David Parrish, Bedroth, Gannon11, aka Mike Stark from the Norwalk Gamer Symphony Orchestra. Ooh, I lost my ASMR. I gotta get back in the groove. Our audio attaché members, the sexy Cameron Werme. Carlos from the Heroes 3 podcast. Scott Magalhone and Dan Lawton. Our special agents, Volt Supreme, Muddle Madness, and Ryan Steele. And our VG ambassador, the patron saint of VGM podcasts, Alex, the messenger from a VGM Journey podcast. That's it.
Well done.
Thank you so much, Cam. Again, thank you for sharing some super awesome tunes. Can't wait to have you back on. Hopefully, sooner or later, we'll be able to be face to face.
Yeah.
And do another show together.
Hopefully.
And like go to some cons, like, because you're my con buddy at this point. So
definitely.
they've delayed the Retro World Expo It was supposed to be in September, I think, but now they've delayed it till 2021. MagFest was supposed to be in January. We had a blast there last year, and
this year was going to be even blastier.
Yeah, well, they haven't announced a delay, but I think even if they are going to have it in January, I'm probably not going to feel very comfortable going.
Yeah.
So
No, me either. My assumption is that cons and stuff are postponed indefinitely, but we'll see.
Exactly. So when they come back, we will definitely start trying to get back out to them. And in the meantime, you can go over to our Discord page. You can go to thevgembassy.com, click on the Discord link on the side of the page, and join us. Cam's always in there. I'm always in there. Lots of VG ambassadors are in there, sharing awesome tunes and just chatting about games and game music in general. So it's a lot of fun. So again, to lead us off of the show, we're going to listen to the 2 tracks that comprise of Manfred Linzner's Coda demo, released for the Amiga in 2019. This is Hyper Lucky and Plastic Dove. See you guys again in another 2 weeks. Peace out, everyone.
Take care.